name is Christopher Gleadle, and I am the CEO of the Paddy Ashdown Forum. Thank you for taking time to be with us today, and welcome to the fourth webinar in this series of EU Latin America webinars on sustainable agriculture, climate change and trade. Today's session, Trade and Forests, the EU Green Deal and Deforestation. And I would first like to thank Pablo Elvedin of GPS for organising today's event. There are just a few house rules. These have been posted in the chat section, but just a brief reminder to respectfully ask if you can keep your microphone muted during the webinar unless you have been asked to speak. And this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Paddy Ashdown Forum and GPS website after the event. Now, without further ado, I have the very great pleasure to hand you over to our moderator today, Irina von Weiser. Over to you, Irina.
Thank you very much, Christopher. I am extremely pleased today to host this webinar, and we have an extremely high-ranking panel today. And before we go to the introduction of the panel, I'd like to say obviously good morning, good afternoon to everyone. And we have with us Robert Woodthorpe-Brown, who is the chair of the Paddy Ashdown Forum, and wanted to say a brief word before we start. Robert, over to you.
Definitely brief, Irina. Today marks the halfway point of the joint project between the Paddy Ashdown Forum and GPS, conceived through mutual friendship between myself and the estimable Horacio Sanchez Caballero, and my admiration of the goals of GPS. Both believe there is enormous scope for mutual cooperation and information exchange between European and Mercosur countries, which will not only increase trade, but contribute to the reduction of the damage being done by greedy and ignorant humans to our planet. Today's forestry discussions should unite us all. We have now a growing number of followers from Europe, Latin America, and the whole world. I commend the first 3 lectures available on the Paddy Ashdown Forum website and that of GPS. To those who missed them, they were of the highest quality. At this halfway stage, I would like to thank the European Liberal Forum for facilitating and publicizing the series. To the leadership of Red de Liberales de America Latina, and most especially my dear colleague, Chris Gleadle, who has worked tirelessly with Pablo Elvedin of GPS to bring this series to you. Many thanks for joining.
Thank you very much, Robert. And without much further ado, we're going to go to our panel. The format of this webinar, as with the others, is that we hear for about 10 minutes from each of our 4 speakers. You will then all have an opportunity to participate. If you like, you can put questions in the Q&A section of your Zoom webinar. I'm assuming that you're all familiar with this. And you can write your questions and submit them at any time throughout the panel discussion. We will also have the opportunity to take live questions from participants, which I would ask you to keep till after the discussion. And we then hope to have a further 45 minutes or so for what I am sure will be a very lively debate. My name is Elena von Wiese. I was a member of the European Parliament, one of those the last crop of British MEPs from July last year until the very sad departure of the UK from the EU on the 31st of January of this year. I also had the honor to be elected Vice President of the Human Rights Subcommittee at the European Parliament. I was also serving on the Foreign Affairs Committee, as well as Liberty and Justice, and in many of these incarnations had the opportunity to work on the ongoing negotiations with the Mercosur Free Trade Agreement, a topic that was very close to my heart from a human rights perspective. And of course, today we're going to look at a slightly different perspective, but I think it will still be very interesting. Our speakers today, firstly, I would like to welcome Dr. Parvo Lopez, who is Policy Officer at the International Forestry Policy Unit of the Environmental Directorate General at the European Commission. And a special thanks goes to Dorte because she agreed very last minute to step in for Borian Glass, who is still, I think, on your invitations but couldn't join us. We will then hear from Alexander Doring, who is Secretary General of European Feed Manufacturers Federation, the FEFAC. So welcome, Alexander, and thank you for joining. Followed by Gustavo Idigoras, who is President of the Chamber of the Oil Industry of the Argentine Republic and is a member of the GPS network, who is of course one of the co-hosts of this series of webinars. And we will finally hear from Thomas Schlichter, who is Vice President of the National Institute of Agricultural Technology of the Argentine Republic, INTA. So thank you very much, and without further ado, Alexander, are you okay to step in and maybe hold your presentation, and then we will come back to Dorten. Thank you.
Hi, Irina. Hey, good afternoon. So I'll see if I have any more luck. So I'll use that famous green button to see if I can get it started. So here is my choice this afternoon. I can see it. I don't know if you can see it.
Perfectly. Thank you very much.
All right. Now, of course, with the change sequence, I really count on Dorte to fill the gaps that I left behind, because I was trying, of course, to build on the introduction by Dorte as far as, let's say, the scope of the EU Commission action is concerned regarding its communication on protecting the world forests. What I have done, just maybe as a way of setting the scene, is to look at the Green Deal overall. First of all, again, you kindly introduced our organization. FIFAC stands for a French acronym, but it's actually what you said. It's the abbreviation for the compound feed and premix industry in Europe. So we're quite an old organization as far as Brussels is concerned. Last year, our 60th anniversary. We have 32 member associations all around Europe, not just the EU. And together, our companies and associations represent about 163 million tons of industrial feed production, which makes us the largest soy user industry in Europe. I think that's a good way to explain why we are here on this call. But of course, we're not the only player here. We are by far not a bottleneck industry. Most of the feed actually gets produced on farm by farmers themselves. And the EU, DG Agriculture, estimated that total feed production in Europe is about 800 million tons. So our market share as industry is about 20%. I think that's important to understand now our positioning here on this important topic. So here you see our soy footprint, 24 million tons of industrial use. You are probably more familiar with the EU overall use, which is running about 30 million tons of soy. Again, the gap is explained by direct use of soy by home mixing operations on farm. So I mentioned the Green Deal. Again, not my task to explain that in detail. I'm sure Dorte will come back and really focus on the more, EU Commission specific actions in this important area of deforestation. What I want to say, it's part of a package, and I think we should be careful when talking about deforestation, not to see it as a single issue. It's embedded in the whole EU Green Deal communications. And, we selected only a few of the key actions which will, we know, affect us as industry, feed industry, livestock industry. So I think more recently, you've probably noted the very important communications Farm to Fork issued by the Commission in May this year, which was basically presented at the same time as the communication on biodiversity, which also is an important linkage into the topic of today. Then, of course, earlier this year, we saw the communication on climate law coming up in March, just before COVID hit us all. And I would also, at that same time frame, we saw the communication on circular economy. Last but not least, very important for our discussion today, we have the ongoing CAP reform discussion. And I think some of the following Brussels closely, EU Commission publications know that within the context of the Farm to Fork communication and biodiversity, there was also a work paper on how CAP reform discussions can be linked to the Green Deal activities. So I will not want to go into too much detail because of time. What we try to do as feed industry, and that's all the arrows and the dark green boxes below, for each of the main Green Deal initiatives, we try to come up with a feed industry response, a contribution, an offering, which way we can help or assist to make the Green Deal work, and to have, truly, more practical guidelines, industry initiatives that can make a positive contribution to some of these important societal and policy goals. And there you find it in the center, the central green box here on the bottom talks about our action plan on responsible soy. And we will go back on that in particular. So what do we do there? I mean, it's not a new topic, as I'm sure you're very familiar with that. Together with our soy value chain partners, some of them are on the call. Here on the European side, I should quote, obviously, our oil crushing industry partner, Fideol, and soy and grain traders represented through Kosoral, moving, shipping soy to Europe. We have been together in this partnership for more than a decade, so it's a topic we've been working on for more or less 15 years, so it doesn't come anything that we have seen from the Commission as a surprise. It's part of an ongoing, long-standing effort to improve good agriculture practice, trading practice, and industry practices all along the chain. So in that sense, all of us, we have actually given, let's say, a guarded support, a welcome to the latest series of Commission communications, and that includes last year's communication on the protection of rural forests. So we actually are certainly sidelining with the Commission to look for what is referred to as a smart mix of solution. Yeah, it sounds very great. What does it really entail? It's about, let's say, a combination of voluntary supply chain actions, like our plan, which I will explain in a moment, but of course, some kind of legislative framework activities, and I think Dot already referred to that, we'll refer to that later, so not for me to go into that part, but I think people are maybe familiar on the call with the EU timber regulation, FLAGT as it's called in the Brussels jargon. So let's say more long-running, already longer-running legislative framework activities that sort of provided incentive for EU chain players, but also for export countries to, let's say, upgrade, improve the forest protection measures linked in that case to timber activities, but now maybe extended to certain crops and other agricultural produce considered as deforestation risk. We look in particular into the use or, pros and cons of using due diligence approaches, which is really the company level here. What is it they need to consider when applying due diligence in looking at cleaning up their supply chain, so to speak, as far as the deforestation risk is concerned. So we do see advantages of going down that way, but again, always beware of unintended consequences. So we're examining that element right now. And of course, it's important as a legal reference because it could establish what we all are looking for, a kind of a level playing field conditions for operators, in our case, in the soy value chain. Obviously, other crops are covered. I will focus, of course, mainly on soy here in this context. Now, what we're really calling for is a risk-based approach. We need to apply a scientific baseline here to first identify what is considered to be a deforestation risk or risk areas, and then, of course, look at the effective risk mitigation options for operators. And biomes are not biomes. They're all different. If you look where our soy comes from, all the origination regions have situations. So there's that complexity of the supply chain that needs to be taken on board and looking into both risk assessment, but also risk mitigation measures. So what we've tried to do on our side as chain partner is kind of separate out what we would call in simple terms, the low risk regions. It may come as a surprise to some people that actually the vast majority of our soy used in Europe comes from low risk origins. Despite of all the headlines you're fully aware of, should I mention the Amazon or other bodies? I don't want to single out a particular region. What I want to say is that the vast majority actually is already originated here and now from low risk origins. But we do, of course, fully recognize that an important part of our supply chain of soy does come from areas, regions which are considered, let's say, higher risk or higher risk status. How do we cover that? Let's say the easier option for operators is just walk away from those regions. There's enough soy in the world to cover European needs. But we are, of course, contending together with our partners. That's the easy way out. We don't like that. We don't think it's effective. If the policy ambition is to halt deforestation, to slow down deforestation, then we need to be active also as commercial partners in those risk areas to actually help promote best practices to reduce the risk of deforestation and to slow down and even halt deforestation. So our plea to the policymakers in Europe is, don't turn your back to these risk areas, help us together with partnership agreements upstream with our supply chain partners, with governments, to set up a meaningful collaboration platforms to address hotspots, issues that have been identified. So following a risk-based approach, I just come back to the numbers, often misquoted or misunderstood. Actually, in the very recent reporting done by one of our collaboration partners in Europe, IDH, the Dutch Sustainability Initiative, who operate with a number of organizations, including Trace and other partners, including ourselves, have estimated that risk exposure, and it's just a risk exposure of less than 20% as far as the 2018 market situation is concerned, and has been already significantly improved since. So that is sort of, let's say, our footprint in terms of origination towards risk areas. What do we consider as risk areas? Again, this is our rough assessment from FIFA side. When we look to Brazil, 50% of the soy we get from Brazil comes from the Cerrado biome. And we consider all of the Cerrado biome as a risk area. It's not to say that all the soy is coming from deforestation, it's linked to deforestation. It's just in terms of biome approaches considered as a risk area. Compare that with Argentina. Thanks to our very good cooperation with Chiara and Gustavo here on the call, that risk exposure area is much smaller. It's the Gran Chaco area, but it's so far remote from, let's say, export corridors that the soy we do get in Europe from Argentina, soy meal in this case, that accounts for just about 3%. So we could clearly see Argentina is overall a very low risk area, with the exception of Gran Chaco, but which does not play a major role in terms of supplies to Europe. As opposed to Paraguay, next door neighbor Paraguay, where we consider all of Paraguay today as a risk exposure area. Now, again, I put in brackets under review. At this moment, we lack credible data that would allow us to subdivide Paraguay in different biome zones, the northern area, the southern area. So it's under review. I'm sure that figure will move down in the near future, but we do need, like in the case of Argentina, Brazil, local credible partners that can help us improve our risk assessment. But for now, in our own risk assessment, we consider all of Paraguay as a high-risk area. Then, of course, that opposes to other origins. As you know, we produce some soy in Europe, not a lot, but there is, of course, Italy, just to mention our #1 soy producer country, some soy produced inside Europe, but also in our neighbor countries, Ukraine. And of course, we do get a lot of soy from the US, but also Canada, so North American sphere, but also think about some non-GM material from India. Think about the organic soy market, and I could even add China here. So these areas are considered low risk in our setting. So moving on to favor the debate. So how do we address these risks? We have developed now for 5 years running a FIFA soy sourcing guidelines, which contains 59 specific criteria, of which 27 are called essential, meaning partners that want to deliver soy and want to be recognized by FIFA as a reliable supplier have to meet those criteria. And this has been done by independent benchmark through ITC in Geneva, the International Trade Council, which is a WTO subsidiary body. So this is a black box. We are not interfering here. It's done objectively and independently by a third-party organization. I also want to stress, often that is a misquote, what we have done here is what it says. It's a guideline. It's not a standard. Now, we have no mandate whatsoever to impose any kind of industry standard. We are not in the commercial area. We're completely pre-competitive, but we want to give recognition of existing soy supply programs. And there are many of them, as you will see in a moment. So what is our mandate here is to facilitate market transparency for responsible soy. And I think that's a plea also for the discussion. Don't detach deforestation from it. As important as deforestation is, it's one criteria out of many. If you think about good agricultural practice, use of pesticides, soil preservation, soil conservation, but also other environmental criteria, and as well social criteria. If you think about workers' rights, human rights, all of that is covered by our guidelines, and we should be careful and mindful about not delinking deforestation from all these other important criteria. It's part of the setting, it's an important element, but it should be an integrated approach. That's what we are pleading for in this context. So, and as you can see from the last figure there, we estimate that since we put this guidelines program together, we have now about 50% of our soy usage today in the industry, not excluding on-farm mixing, coming from one of the schemes positively benchmarked by ITC. And here they are. So these are our immediate supply chain partners providing the guarantees to industry users in Europe that they have fulfilled all these criteria and made a specific effort to ensure there is compliance with the benchmark guidelines that we have developed and for which we have ITC as the benchmarking body in Geneva. As you will recognize a lot of names, I will not quote them all, but what I think is important in terms of the transparency element, we have farmers' own programs, and talking about Argentina, APRESEED, the soy farmer organization in Argentina, has been a first mover. They were the first to enter the benchmarking program, and they were the first farmer program that have received full recognition for their excellent soy program. And it's developing very, very close contact with them. Of course, it's a dynamic system. So we do have farmers' own programs. And of course, I shall mention the US farmers program, but also in Brazil, we have Coamo in the south that has been already positively benchmarked. Next to that, we have traders programs. Again, I don't have to do a special promotion here. These names are all familiar to you. We have our own members programs like FEMAS in the UK, but also in Belgium, which have been positively benchmarked. And then last but not least, commercial certification programs. Many of them are very well known to you. And that's the benefit. We have this full transparency. All the logos you see are push buttons. If you go to the website, you will immediately get on their respective websites and you can download their specific soy program. Now, let me just then come to the final part here on the deforestation-free challenge. We are now in the process of upgrading our guidelines. Now they're 5 years old. It's time for an upgrade because of the whole principle of continuous improvement, underlying sustainability. Currently, our guideline have a reference to no illegal deforestation. So it's the legality principle that is, let's say, our benchmark here. And so we have, of course, as an imperative demand that no soy is produced on land that's illegally deforested. So no illegal soy. But as you know from the EU communication, and many of our market partners say that's good, but that's not good enough. You need to also think about legal deforestation and go beyond the law, and that's not as easy to be done as said. So it's not that easy, and that's what we're looking into now. How to get into that sphere to move forward and to respond to societal and market demand. So that's what we're looking now into. We have again an independent party helping us on this, looking at defining deforestation free in operational terms. We have good. It's not a problem of definitions per se, but you have to translate these definitions into a certifiable, verifiable environment so that any auditor that is checking out any of the standards that you just saw can actually verify, ascertain that the deforestation-free criteria have been met. So that will cover 4 key components: forest provisions, cutoff dates, very important, chain of custody, and level of assurance. And again, we don't do this alone. We are not the forest experts, to be very clear. We have partners out there. We work with also NGOs that are willing to work with industry. You see some of them here, WWF, IUCN, with our partners as mentioned. And of course, I shall mention our overseas partners. Just mentioned Chiara APRESEED for Argentina, but I can also mention ABIOVE for Brazil. So we hope to have this covered by end of the year and then restart the benchmarking program. So that's why we try to be ready even before, let's say, the legislative action is being rolled out, as we heard. And we will hear certainly in a moment, that's for 2021. So we try to stay ahead of the game and again, do our utmost to fulfill societal and market demands here in Europe to meet that specific goal. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for providing the industry view on this. And I'm sure you have given us a lot of food for thought. Dorte, shall we have another attempt to try to, for you to share the view of the Commission?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So just to have a bit of background on what the EU has been doing with regard to deforestation. As was pointed out already, we were before focusing on illegal logging, and so working mainly with respect to deforestation through illegal logging. So we were looking only at the legality, and we were only looking at timber and products derived from timber. So if you could just go on to the next slide, please. So this, I think, is something that you all know. All of the participants are aware of the amount of the size of the problem, say. So I think it would be okay to just skip this in view of the short time that we have, and go on to the role of the EU in all of this. So next slide, please. So what is our role in deforestation and forest degradation? Well, the EU is a big consumer continent, nearly. So the EU is a big consumer of commodities. And so as a major importer of commodities that are associated with deforestation and forest degradation, we feel that we need to do something about it. Already the next numbers show you that 1/3 of the globally traded agricultural products are associated with deforestation of those products that we consume in the EU. And that actually makes us responsible for 10% of worldwide deforestation. At least that's how we see it. So next slide, please. In view of this, we've been working for quite a number of years preparing communication on deforestation, or better, communication on stepping up EU action to fight against deforestation, to protect and to restore the world's forests. The main points addressed by this communication are the reduction of the consumption footprint, which is major, as I explained on my earlier slide, on land, and to encourage the consumption of products from deforestation-free supply chains. To do that, to achieve that, we want to work in partnership with producing countries and thus reduce the pressure on forests and to deforest-proof EU development cooperation. So that's a major way of reaching that goal. We would like to strengthen international cooperation to halt deforestation. And of course, forest degradation. Forest degradation actually is a point that is often forgotten, because when you speak of virgin forests, even a sustainable use can lead to degradation and finally to deforestation. So we have to be also keep in mind the forest degradation and the problems that involves. And we want to encourage sustainable forest restoration, meaning not just planting trees, any trees, anywhere, but restoring forests. So planting trees that belong in that area, etc. We also want to redirect finance in support of more sustainable land use practices, to support those who want to practice, want to use land use practices that are sustainable, and support thus the availability of and the quality of, and also the access to information on forest and commodity supply chains, because that is an experience we have from the regulations that are actually presently in place, the European Timber Regulation, for example, and the FLEGT regulation. The information is key, information for the market operators, information for the customers who would like to buy from these market operators, but also the information of the competent authorities who would like to enforce the regulations that are in place. So information is key, and that's why we think that's another important point. All these points, of course, are reflected in the communication on stepping up EU action to protect and restore the world's forests. Next slide, please. As was mentioned before, a basic and big document that deforestation communication is linked into is the European Green Deal. So the European Green Deal is kind of the, let's say, the Bible for the next period, the ongoing Commission period, and it is stated in the European Green Deal that, and I quote, "The Commission will take measures, both regulatory and otherwise, to promote imported products and value chains that do not involve deforestation and forest degradation." So that's a commitment in the overall framework of the Green Deal. Another one, actually the other two were also mentioned already. So there's the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, 2030, the Commission will also present in 2021, so next year, a legislative proposal and other measures to avoid or minimize the placing of products associated with deforestation or forest degradation on the EU market. So here we come from the European Green Deal, which is wider and of course does not contain such specific commitments. We come to more specific commitment that next year we want to come up with a legislative proposal to fight deforestation and forest degradation. And then finally, also mentioned before, the farm to fork strategy, where again, the Commission says that it will present in 2021 a legislative proposal. So you can see that both from the biodiversity strategy side and from the farm to fork strategy side, we are aiming for this legislative act, which will be linked with, of course, all kinds of commodities that are deforestation related. Next slide, please. So big words and big commitments. What are we doing about it? The impact assessment for possible demand-side measures is ongoing. So we launched this exercise and it's ongoing. And what is actually quite good is that in parallel, we started the so-called fitness check. So for those who are not familiar with these things, with this terminology, the fitness check means that the Commission looks at several regulations or directives that exist to make sure that they're fit for purpose. So it's a true fitness check. And that is ongoing right now as well, in parallel on the European timber regulation, the so-called EUTR, and the FLEGT regulation. So there are two different things. There is the FLEGT, and FLEGT means the forest, law, enforcement, governance, and trade. That's what FLEGT stands for. So the FLEGT action plan was something that came up in 2003, and it foresees several actions, just like the present deforestation communication foresees several actions. And two of these actions ended in legislative acts and in binding commitments. One is the European Timber Regulation that regulates the placement on the European market, on the EU market, so including the EEA states, of timber. So it can be timber that is produced in the EU or timber that comes from outside the EU. And that timber has to be legally harvested. And operators have to make sure by doing due diligence that that is actually the case. And they have to go through certain steps. We heard the comments earlier on the importance of risk management, risk assessment. Well, of course, also first the information needs to be collected, the risk assessment has to be made, and then if there's a risk mitigating measures have to be taken. So that's the EUTR, the European Timber Regulation. And then there's another instrument that is the voluntary partnership agreements. The Commission has negotiated several voluntary partnership agreements. 7 are in force, but only one has so far been so well implemented that we have actually been able to allow in joint agreement Indonesia to license, to emit licenses, so-called FLEGT licenses, that are kind of like a guarantee that can be considered as compliant, of guaranteeing compliance with the applicable laws regarding harvest. So the FLEGT, these so-called VPAs, the voluntary partnership agreements, allow, if they are well implemented, the third country to emit these licenses, which then facilitate the import and are considered under the European Timber Regulation as legally harvested. This is the present framework, so we are checking it to see what can we learn from it, so that we can then use that under the impact assessment and in the future legislative act. We also have launched a multi-stakeholder platform. A first meeting is foreseen in October. There's a study on certification schemes ongoing, And the EU Observatory is meant to provide better information and that is under development. So there are many things ongoing in parallel. I mentioned before that we are a very small team, so you can imagine we have a lot of work because, of course, at the same time, we still have to also make sure that the European Timber Regulation and the FLEGT Regulation and the voluntary partnership agreements, which we are still negotiating or supporting the implementation of, also are implemented and worked on. Slide 7, please. So next one. So to then come to the specific deforestation, so the new regulatory framework that we would like to launch next year. So what we have been looking into, what measures are being studied in the impact assessment. Of course, we look at things that we already have some experience with. So that's due diligence systems. But we believe that we have to go beyond that because we have encountered quite a few difficulties with the due diligence implementation to make sure that, you know, it's difficult. It's a difficult concept, etc. So we are looking into things like voluntary and mandatory labeling. As you know, voluntary labeling is quite common. Mandatory labeling for commodities sometimes does exist, and you know the question will be, could that be done? Labeling that something is deforestation and forest degradation free. We're looking at a deforestation-free requirement or standard for access to market. So we're interested in other schemes that exist. We're looking into voluntary commitments from industry. So like those, for example, that we just heard of. We are looking at certification and verification systems. Again, we're looking at due diligence. It's obvious that, you know, that's where we have experience. Agreements with third countries, there as well we have experience. The volunteer partnership agreements have resulted, as I said before, despite a long-standing practice of negotiating these and supporting implementation, so far only has come to one country being able to license, and we've, you know, had some difficulties even after that. So it's something that is, and it requires a lot of input and work, and but we want to see whether maybe that could still be an option, also in view of the fact that here we are talking about a wider range of commodities, and we already have problems with just a small range of commodities, so just certain types of timber, certain HHS codes, and only legality. We will see what comes out of it. So we're not sure, but we will certainly have a look. We also look into approaches inspired by EU rules against illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, a system that seems to be working very well, and that could maybe also be transposed to something that is on land, so from fish to, I don't know, soy, cocoa, or other commodities, and of course also timber. Then one could maybe build on benchmarking, country assessments, or so-called blacklists. Also in that respect, we do have some experience. Now, we don't blacklist or do anything like that countries, but we do have, of course, countries that we worry more about than others, countries of origin, of harvest, or countries of production, which do not allow for tracing back commodities like timber to the source. So we do country overviews, and in which we highlight some possible risk factors and quote different assessments from different sources regarding these countries. In our case, of course, for now, it's country overviews regarding illegal harvest of timber. We also think about maybe obligations for corporate disclosure, so more transparency and non-financial reporting tools and consumer information campaigns. So we're not talking about just one of these. We're looking into all of these, and we are open to any combination of these, wherever it is most adequate in the concrete case. Next slide, please. Here's the timeline. So unfortunately, these things do take time. On the one hand, unfortunately, on the other hand, I think it's a good thing. We have the so-called better regulation rules internally that make us do things hopefully right, with a lot of public consultation, with targeted stakeholder consultations. And we have this deforestation platform which we set up where we will have discussions. And we of course also have support from third parties, so an external assistant who is supporting us to bring together all that information and assess it, and to move forward with both the fitness check and the impact assessment. So as you see here, this is our hope that in 2021, second quarter, we will be able to submit the legislative proposal and then be there. So thank you a lot for your attention. I've not quite kept the timeline. So a lot of information, and I wanted to embed it in a bit of explanation. So for those who maybe are not so familiar with the EU specificities. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Dorte. I'm glad we managed in the end to share your very interesting slides on that topic. Without further ado, we're going to pass the word to the Argentinian side, and could I invite first Gustavo Idigoras, please, apologies, who is the president of the Chamber of the Oil Industry in Argentina. Gustavo, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for the organizer to tackle this very important issue, particularly also for Argentina. Let me introduce our goal and our particular situation based on the characteristic of Argentina. Argentina is a very typical agriculture exporter country. For the whole export of the country, we represent more than 60% of total national export. And particularly in my case, I represent exporter of soybean meal, corn, wheat, soybean oil, soybean and biodiesel accounting for around 50% of the total national export. So for Argentina, it's very critical market access. Europe is the historical trade partnership, and we are working in order to increase our export and of course also European investment based on the EU-Mercosur deal. But coming back to the particular topic on EU Green Deal, we really welcome the idea of European Union to address this particular issue, because we are convinced that agriculture has a lot of benefit for environment, and it is important to set up policies regarding the decarbonization of agriculture. We have already started for a long time ago our agriculture policy, but particularly industry and farmer policy regarding the decarbonization of agriculture, particularly on three topics. The first one, which is the long-standing topic in Argentina, is no-tilling practice, which is a conservation agriculture practices. I'm not going to focus today on this because I'm going to focus more on deforestation and deforestation policies, non-deforestation policies. But I think, and I'm very convinced that if Europe is going to progress and to move forward on carbon balance, EU Green Deal, and so on, agriculture conservation practice should be enforced and implemented for all European farmers too. So let me introduce particularly on the case of Chaco region. As my friends Alexander Dorin have already introduced, this is the second largest biome in South America, representing 55% of the area of Argentina, or of the similar surface of France, the territory of France, including unique flora and fauna, of course, a carbon reservoir, and a home of very indigenous communities in the country. Argentina has already settled a law. I think that our Vice President of INTA, the next speaker, will introduce more the conversation about the implementation of this law, but we have a law just with different categories in colors, including red, which is fully protected. There is no possibility of land conversion for agriculture of livestock in any way. Green, which is destined for conversion because there is no negative environmental impact. And yellow, which sun-specific sustainable forest management, is not allowed for agriculture production. 5 years ago, as an industry program, we have decided to launch our monitoring program of Gran Chaco in order to fulfill the national law and particularly to focus on illegal deforestation. So we set up Agroideal program with NGOs, international NGOs like Nature Conservancies and others, and in Argentina like Vida Silvestres and others, but also with scientifics. Will launch this program to monitor all these regions. Let me show you some particularly results. This program was financed by industry, by exporters. Many of them have been mentioned by Alex as part also of the General Alliance for the guidelines of FFAC in Europe, but also there are the major exporters of grain and soybean products in Argentina. So let me share with you the result of this annual monitoring program that we have in place. Gran Chaco region means 65 million hectares, the same of the territory of France, of which from a monitoring program from the last 10 years, from 2008 till 2018, and we are still running out year by year this program, the total area of deforested green, yellow, and red, including green, which is allowed, and including yellow, which in some places also allowed, it means only 2.2% of the total area. But if we focus on the agriculture side, we only have, and we only account for 0.11%. But if we focus only on soybean production of the last 10 years, we account only on 0.09%. So it's a very negligible deforestation risk that we have right now. Besides that, we have a commitment as an industry, as an exporter, as a value chain, to try to fulfill our national legislation. Because we consider, when we are talking about deforestation, that we need to fulfill national regulation about protected forests. So this commitment have already begun at the beginning of this year with the new administration, federal administration in Argentina, talking about how we can work together and articulate a documental and a traceability program to give full assurance of fulfillment of our national forest legislation. Besides that, total Gran Chaco area report less than 5% of total soybean to be exported in the country. So the level of risk that we have right now is very limited. In addition of the Green Deal, it's a very important part about carbon neutrality. So we are fully convinced that carbon neutrality should be the goal for all food and feed value chain. So we have already launched last year an industry program to work on carbon balance in order that all exporters of food and feed in all different value chains in Argentina should fulfill our standard on carbon balance based on ISO methodology and an international recognized methodology. Finally, I think that we need to work in 3 different pillars on this international roadmap for Green Deal. The first one is technical cooperation and capacity building. Not all the countries, not all the industries, not all the value chains have experience, have scientific background, have technical capabilities in order to develop and to fulfill the goals of the Green Deal. So we need to reinforce technical cooperation, and we are open to work on that. The second one is industry strategic alliance. If we are just imagine in the incoming years that in Brussels, in a restaurant, you will request a beef on a table having carbon neutrality, then you need to work with Argentina, because we are the supplier of soybean meal. And if you don't have carbon neutrality on soybean meal, then you are not going to have any kind of beef certifying of carbon neutrality in Europe. So we need to develop industry strategic alliance, and we need to have a full support of the European Parliament in this particular regard. And the final point is recognition of equivalence, because we already have systems in Argentina, and also we already have many systems in Mercosur countries. It is important that when the Commission is going to launch proposal to open the mind with the idea to have a recognition of the way that other countries are implementing sustainable program, sustainability system and certification for food and feed. It is critical to do that, because if not, we are going to create extra cost and unnecessary barrier for trade. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Gustavo, for that very interesting presentation, which I am sure will elicit a lot of questions. But before we get to that, could I invite Thomas Schlichter, please, who is Vice President of INTA, for the final presentation. Thank you. Thomas, the floor is yours. Can you hear us?
I will try to share my presentation now. I hope it will work. Here we are. Can you see it? Okay, I'm a man of the forest, a researcher in forest science. So my presentation will be, in some cases, show very nice forests and trees. I will talk about our goals in relation to emissions coming from the forest sector, the legislation was also already mentioned by Gustavo, and what happens in the field, the technologies that we are developing to produce meat in a compatible way with conserving forests. First of all, we have our National Forest and Climate Change Action Plan. This was launched in 2018, supported by RED, and involved huge work in the country. Many consultancies, many workshops, and this was a result of a wide consensus. The carbon emissions in Argentina, this is the total emissions, how much is due to each of our sectors. And you can see that the forest sector is responsible for 15.66% of the emissions of the country, mostly due to deforestation. Forest degradation is much very difficult to quantify. In 2007, the conservation law for native forests was launched. As Gustavo already mentioned, we have 3 categories of forests. There was a land use planning, a zoning of all the forests of the country. The zoning was carried out by each of the provinces. You know, Argentina is a federal country, so each of the provinces had to carry out its own zoning. The red zoning was to forests which should remain intact. Nothing can be done there. Perhaps some research, but no commercial activity, no economic activity. The yellow is devoted to sustainable forest management. Only sustainable forest management can be carried out there. And the green allows for some land use change followed must be before an environmental impact assessment. The law considers the payment for environmental services. So the forests in the yellow category and the red category may have some payment for the services that they provide to all of the society. This was considered to be one of the most important aspects of our law. In addition, all the zoning must be made in a participative way, where NGOs, scientific institutions, governments, the society in general, participates in the zoning of each province. So you can see some results here. The law took some time to be implemented because, as I said before, the provinces had to make its own zoning, and this took some years. But the average of deforestation from 2011 to 2013 was 230,000 hectares, and it dropped very much in 2014 to 1,085,000 hectares. I must mention that Argentina normally has a debt with other countries, but in this case, the United Nations has a debt with Argentina, because in our strategic plan, we had a reference line, a baseline of emissions of deforestation, and in 2014 and afterwards, we fall very below this line, having now the right to get some dollars from the United Nations. And so we consider this as a very important aspect. You can see now here down the Argentina, the region, Chaco region, which Gustavo showed before, is at the north. Most of the deforestation took place in the center-west of this region, which is mainly zoned as yellow, where sustainable forest management can take place. And you can see that the red part is considerably less, because we don't have the intention of making the whole country as a national park. But this law, I must say, was launched by the interest of our society. It was a great pressure of the whole society to stop deforestation, and we had 2 million signatures pressing to launch this law, which was therefore supported by most of our country's society. Our goals in terms of our national plan of climate and forests are to diminish our net emissions to 27 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalents. That is half of what the emissions are now. And with additional measurements and with some finance, we could do it to reduce net emissions of 81. That is in net sequestration of carbon from our forests. So now let's go to the field. We developed technologies following the demands of the law to sustainable forest management to produce cattle, have cattle raising in forest management, integrated with forest management. The intention is to maintain the forest structure and main functions. So the trees are there, the regeneration of trees are there, and still can produce meat in these ecosystems. This technology was signed by 2 of our ministers, the Agricultural Ministry and the Environment Ministry. And also 10 of our provinces signed this agreement. Of course, all of the Great Chaco provinces, and some of the Central and South Patagonia. The Chaco region, of course, is much broader, as Gustavo showed, but where deforestation is taking place is more or less more than 6 million, the semi-arid part. You can see what happens here in the slide. And you see here what we are proposing. The upper part, you see the pristine forest. In the medium, what we are proposing with taking the shrubs away, but still maintaining the trees and it's the regeneration of the trees and seeding some high production pastures. And in the lower part, what happened, that was huge caterpillars coming and throwing the trees down and leaving only 50 to 70 trees per hectare, which after some years, of course, the wind throw also down. So the intermediate picture is what we are proposing. And you see some numbers there. In the pristine forest, our production of forest is very low, and the tree basal area, the amount of forest biomass is high, 8 square meters per hectare. In the medium, what we are proposing, land sharing, the option, we have much production of forage, and the tree basal area is almost the same as the pristine forest. So, but we will use the shrub cover to 30%, allowing to the penetration of light and other resources. And what in the deforestation case, what they call silvopastoril, the forage is of course much higher, but the tree basal area is nil, and the shrub cover is also is nothing. So 60% of the forest are in yellow part. And we are proposing for all of the forest that the cattle should maintain, cattle producing systems should maintain the structure of the forest as following land sharing technology. Here comes to you some hard data. The hard data is at the left side, you see the silvopastoril system where they throw down all the trees, only the remains 50 trees per hectare. The other one is from left to right is the pastures. And then we come to our land sharing proposal and to the pristine forest. In this case, the left picture is meat production. But on the right side of the picture, you can see the increase in carbon stock. The two of the right are the management of forest with integrated cattle and the pristine forest, having the same amount of carbon producing meat that in the pristine forest with almost no meat. And to do this, we have our institute that is distributed in the whole country. We have a staff of 7,000 people, more or less 4,000 are professionals. We have 52 experimental stations, 22 research institutes, and more than 350 extension units. And our board is constituency is 5 of the private sector and 5 people of the public sector. So each of our proposals, projects, and technology has the support of the private sector. The one that I showed you before is also supported by the private sector. And we have also support of a very big NGO in Argentina, the Fundación Vida Silvestre, that also represents the WWF, which supports this land sharing cattle production. So only one question is now, I want to make one question more. We need some finance, we need of course support to develop this technology and apply it in the whole country. And, we're waiting to know what will happen with RED. So that's all for today. Thank you very much. And I hope I stick to my 10 minutes.
You did, Tomasz. Thank you very much for this very insightful presentation. Before we open up to discussion, I accidentally deprived two very distinguished guests of their opening remark. My apologies. You will see in the program that we have here with us, firstly, Horacio Sanchez Caballero, who is, of course, the general coordinator of the group of producing countries of the Southern Cone, GPS. And Horacio kindly agreed to wrap up the discussion with some closing remarks. Horacio, over to you.
Thank you, Irina. Do you hear me?
Yes, perfectly
Okay.
fine.
Good. Well, thank you to Paddy Ashton Forum to organize such an interesting discussion. This is the fourth one of a group of 8 we are going to have in the full program. And I think that this makes a special link between the 4 Mercosur countries and the European Union. Of course, thank you to my friend Robert Brown and for magic conductor Christopher Gleadle for organizing all this. I think that this is bringing Europe and South America around food production systems, climate change, and trade issues, bridging the both regions. The crisis in which we humans are involved now, health, climate change, hunger, migration, labor, military nuclear race, impact of technology, artificial intelligence, etc., needs multiple approaches. In this context, the international institutions born after Bretton Woods are losing its glue capacity. A new international architecture must be designed, and this must be based on dialogue and confidence. No institutional system can survive if it misses these 2 supports. These webinars are a very appropriate way to promote both dialogue and confidence, exposing our point of view with an open attitude to discuss them, looking for sharing coincidences and trying to narrow differences. This can be our contribution for the world to come. EU and Mercosur, with complementary cultural background, capacities in the agribusiness and other fields, could be one pivot also in the US-China confronting world. Allow me now to finish a literary license. Our 2 regions approach can be compared to building a bridge in which each stone has its position. And as Italo Calvino, the Italian writer, says in his book, The Invisible Cities, which is a supposed dialogue between Kublai Khan, the emperor, and Marco Polo, and I quote, Marco Polo describes a bridge, stone by stone. But which is the stone that supports the bridge? Kublai Khan asks. The bridge is not supported by one stone or another, Marco answers, but by the line of arch that they form. Kublai Khan remains silent, reflecting this, and then he adds, why do you speak to me of the stones? It's only the arch that matters to me. But Polo answers, without stones, there is no arch. So strong agreements consolidate a foreseeable future, including all the stones to build the line of arch. Thank you.
I really liked that picture there, Horacio. Thank you very much for your closing remarks. And finally, last but certainly not least, I would like to pass for the final closing remarks the word to Carola Ramón-Lejano, who is Undersecretary of Multilateral and Bilateral Economic Negotiations of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Argentina. Carola, finally, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Irina. Good morning and good afternoon to you all. I would also like to congratulate GPS and the Paddy Ashton Forum for kindly inviting us to join in this particular seminar we had today, and also for organizing a very successful and interesting series of EU-Mercosur webinars. From our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, together with our colleagues in our embassy to the European Union, we have been supporting and collaborating with the organization of this fourth seminar. We believe that the dialogue that we had today and exchange of ideas has been of great relevance and interest, both for Argentina as well as for the European Union. We have been closely following the communications from the European Commission and the debates concerning deforestation and sustainable agricultural production, as well as the more recent farm to fork and biodiversity strategies as part of the European Green Deal. We understand that the EU approach to third countries is to work together on these issues through dialogue and cooperation. Deforestation is a complex matter, and for Argentina, as a relevant producer and one of the most important exporting countries of agricultural products, it is of utmost importance. We're fully committed to this path of dialogue. For this reason, a few weeks ago, we agreed with the European Commission DG Agri to launch a bilateral dialogue on sustainable agriculture in order to exchange information, experiences, and promote bilateral cooperation. We have high expectations about this initiative. Enhancing cooperation and building trust, as Horacio just mentioned, between our governments, institutions, and the general public is therefore essential and must be encouraged in order to account for countries' diverse characteristics and existing international standards in the discussions. We need to support and promote joint collaborative projects to address challenges faced by Argentina and other agricultural exporters in the supply of quality commodity products to the EU and the rest of the world, of course, while at the same time minimizing the risks of deforestation and forest degradation. It was very interesting to hear all four speakers today. And I also think it's very important to stress to have both the private and public sectors together, because this shows a very strong commitment in the fight against deforestation and the development of sustainable agricultural production. There is a long way ahead of us in this, but as the saying goes, if you walk alone, you'll go faster, but if you walk together, you'll get further. So we certainly hope that we can walk this long and mutually beneficial path together. Thank you very much.
Carola, thank you very much for this closing remarks. I mean, I thought it was a really interesting discussion. I'm very glad that we brought together both the regulator and the industry that will be subject to the regulation. I think we've heard from all the speakers an overall optimistic view of the world, which particularly in light of the COVID crisis and other setbacks this year is really for me quite encouraging to hear. Now, Horacio was quoting Italo Calvino's allegory of the bridge, and maybe I can kick off the discussion by asking the industry representatives here, from their practical experience, what kind of projects are already working today and are examples of collaboration between the EU and Latin America, and maybe can be seen as a signal for towards continued progress? Do you have any specific examples? Maybe we can start with Gustavo. Gustavo, in case you are speaking, you may be on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Well, in the particular side regarding collaboration, I could focus on the industry, European industry, Argentinian industry collaboration. For a long time, we are been working together with FEFAC, also with FEDIOL and COSERAL, three of the largest European industry associations, working with the idea to exchange information regarding sustainable system of production and also trying to draft guidelines for fulfillment of sustainable requirement. So in this particular sense, we really want to stress all of the collaboration, but we are requesting formally from the beginning of this year when we visited Brussels and visited a few DG officials in order to develop a technical cooperation and as to be part of the process of consultation of dialogue, as already our Undersecretary Carola have already said, or in order to work with the Commission and with the European industry to address all these technical issues regarding EU Green Deal. Because we are convinced that Green Deal is a universal goal, but we need to fulfill without stressing or without distorting system of productions, which are pretty different in different countries and in different regions. In our region, in Mercosur region, we have very different system of production than in Europe. So we need to give all the assurance that the equivalence recognition of system of production should be part of the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that view. I don't know, Tomasz, if you want to add to this from your perspective? You're still on mute.
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, we have at least 2 projects of Euroclima supporting our research. One of them is related very much to what I presented before, the management of forest with cattle in the land sharing proposal. Of course, we need much more support in order to generalize this system to the whole Chaco region and other forest regions of the country also. I will support what Gustavo said about our certification systems. We need you to recognize and support our certification systems. We have our own forest certification system, which is recognized by the European system. And we were very proud of it also, because INTA was part of the development of the system. And we had experiences before, for example, with the green development mechanism. I don't know if you remember, that was the intention of payment of carbon for carbon sequestration in forest plantations. That was a fiasco, really. And most of it was due to the amount of verifications, certifications, validations that all involved a huge amount of consultancies that would cost much more that would be paid by the carbon sequestration itself. So it didn't work. So we need now certification validation systems developed by us, supported also in this case by the European Union, and much cheaper, that will allow to produce and not spend all of our money in this certification. So both the development of the technology, the generalization of the technology, and the support to our systems of verification and certification are very important.
Thank you, Tomasz. I should add that unfortunately Alexander Doing had to leave the webinar, but I don't know if Dorte is still there and would like to add something from the European Commission's perspective on that question. Dorte?
Yes, I'm here. So, sorry, I was actually absent a little moment because I have other things to attend to. So could you repeat the question, because I just heard about cooperation possibilities, but specifically for the Commission?
Yes, yes, indeed. We were looking at examples of projects, specific projects that you think are already working today between the EU and Latin America that you think could serve as some form of blueprint going forward.
Yes. I'm sorry about not being able to reply to this because, as I mentioned in the beginning, we had actually hoped that a colleague from the Director General that is in charge of such projects would be here in my place or in Bojan's place to reply to such questions, because we don't have that knowledge in our field. We're working on the legislation, and we would ask for input from the different Director General when needed, but we don't run those projects. So I'm afraid I cannot help you on that. But I heard, of course, about the project that were mentioned before by Thomas. So climate projects, if I understood correctly, and certification projects, but I cannot give more information on that. So I'm sorry.
That's not a problem. Thank you, Dr. I should also say that there's always the option to post follow-up questions to the Paddy Ashdown Forum website, or indeed further information that you can find there. I would very much like to open the discussion up, not having received any questions in writing. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to ask a question? If so, could you please unmute yourself and ask? Otherwise, I will ask another question. So this is your chance. No? Okay. Well, I actually, yes, Tomasz. You're on mute, Tomasz.
Well, if you, I think it's very important to come to RED Plus. RED Plus meant a lot of effort of our countries to make our strategies, RED strategies, and it's thought to compensate the countries for the diminution in deforestation. This should, this climate finance scheme should should begin to function, to work, and it should pay an adequate amount of for each ton of carbon, avoided carbon emission due to deforestation. And now it seems to be very low, but the world is wanting to pay. So, and if it is so low, and you add the certification systems, it will be nil, and it won't work again. So I think we need a joint effort to make it work, diminish the costs, and pay something more.
Thank you. Tomasz, you were taking the words right out of my mouth, because my question actually was on RED Plus. So maybe to follow up on that and invite others also to comment. So where do you think should the price be in order for RED Plus to fulfill its purpose? Anyone who would like to have a go at this, I'd be very welcome. Tomasz, otherwise, I mean, you said it is too low. What is too low, and when would it work?
More than the $5 per ton that is now.
Are there any views maybe from others in the room on RED Plus? And as far as I understand, this is a new mechanism which creates a financial value for the carbon stored in forests. And it should work by offering incentives for developing countries to reduce emissions from foresters' lands. Now, I am not sure exactly how RED Plus prices or values for carbon are set. Maybe somebody can enlighten me and explain the system better, and also explain the way how we can get to actually use RED Plus in a more useful way. and achieve that price. No? It remains an open question.
Perhaps we should invite for the next meetings people of the World Bank or the FCPF and from United Nations RED, UN RED, and they can explain a little more about this.
There is, I think, a very good idea for the next discussion round, because it seems to me that this is an important one of those little stones in the overall bridge that we're trying to build here. I'm not sure if we have any NGOs in the audience, but of course, I have seen in my role as Vice President of the Human Rights Subcommittee also another aspect of the whole negotiations between the EU and Mercosur, which is the impact on human rights. And I should add to this that, of course, environmental rights and human rights are very closely linked in Latin America, specifically with regard to indigenous people who are often also defenders of environmental rights. And I know this is maybe outside the immediate topic of this webinar, and I'm hoping that we will be able to have a separate webinar on the topic of impact of human rights. But I would be interested to hear from the two industry representatives in particular. How do you think that the various mechanisms that you have described that are already put in place, how you work with indigenous peoples in order to make this happen, and indeed whether they have been involved in consultations and also in the next step going forward? I don't know, Gustavo or Tomas, whether you want to have a go?
In our case, as an industry, indigenous communities in Argentina are based on, first of all, on a national law, which have full recognition of social guarantees and rights. Second part, there is a very specific national institute to protect all their rights and the right for agriculture production. The third part is that in our program that I have already introduced regarding zero deforestation, we have already introduced the subject to the national administration due to the fact that this 0.09%, part of them is producing by indigenous communities, because the agriculture is a way of living. They are not producing for export, they are not producing for selling to exporter, but they are producing as a way of living. So we have already requested to the national administration to have an overall approach of this, not only to fulfill EU requirements on zero deforestation, but to protect the right for that communities to continue working on agriculture as a way of living. So we are working with our government in this particular regard.
Thank you. Tomas, anything you want to add from your perspective?
I want to say that what I mentioned, the forest law considers specifically the rights of the indigenous people. Each measurement, each thing must be consulted with them. There's no possibility of applying the law without consulting the indigenous people. In addition, we at INTA are working very much with them. We develop the technology jointly with them. Most of them are, many of them are extractivists. They are not people that they are not doing deforestation. Many of these people don't have also agriculture. They live from the products of forest. And on the side, they have some small amount of cattle, goats, something so. We could say that they are very poor people. And the most important aspect here is what the government is doing in order to ensure land tenure for these people. The government is working hard and is doing this in all over the country. So that's it.
Thank you, Tomasz. And I obviously, if Carola or Orazio would like to add anything to any of the topics that we've mentioned, you are more than welcome. We would love to hear your views as well. I don't know if you have anything you would like to add.
Actually, I would like to add something.
Of course, Dorjen, please go ahead.
Yes. This is actually something that was mentioned earlier, much earlier by Thomas, about the issue of certification being so complex and having maybe an easier way or a less complex way of doing things, while at the same time ensuring that not only carbon capture, but actually here we're talking about deforestation, and forest degradation is ensured, and that is it's true. It's a very difficult balance to strike. That a system will not get too heavy on the users of nature, so of forests in this case, and at the same time ensure that it's reliable. So indeed, it would be very interesting to see how all aspects are reflected in systems like the one for RED Plus, because you know, CO2 is one thing, but biodiversity protection, which is also an important element for the future of humanity. I'm putting this very dramatically, but it's something that should not be ignored, that we don't pass the tipping point for biodiversity. And so, you know, we have to have systems that are strong in all areas, and I count a lot on scientists in this context, and I'm glad that a lot of advancement of, for example, assessment of CO2 capture of carbon capture is advancing. We have much better data on deforestation and forest degradation, which was not possible a few years ago. So all of this, I think, could help having systems that are reliable, but not very complex for the individual farmer or trader or so in commodities. So that could be, I think, a viable way to go forward. And with the EU Observatory, we want to go a bit more in that direction to be able to give data to governments and to individuals, I mean, the whole public actually, to be able to better see whether what is being done is really sustainable in the entire way, not only looking at CO2, not only looking at one or the other aspect, but looking at all of them together.
Indeed, and I think that is particularly true for Gran Chaco, which is a region I visited and was very impressed indeed with the natural beauty there. I don't know, Carola or Orazio, if you would like to add to this point.
Yes. Sorry if I am a little bit disruptive, but of course, indigenous people burn wood. Oh, horrible. Well, they don't have gas, they don't have electricity, so they have to cook. And if we go back to Ferdinand de Saussure, when he spoke about raw and cooked meat, we can understand that this people is doing what they can in order to survive. And one more comment. When sometimes we do speak about the child work, which should be forbidden. Well, I would say that in some cases, children are helping their parents, for example, to put the cows in the dairy and for the parents to milk the cows. So they are working, yes, they are learning how to be able to work. So if this is also run with these people, if possible, going to school, I don't see that the forbidding just as a general rule children working is not according to reality. I don't
Thank
know
you,
if
Horacio.
I should run out of the room now or what.
It is certainly a very interesting debate, which I think is reminiscent of many debates we had in the subcommittee. And I'm sure we will be able to pick this up maybe at a separate occasion. Carola, is there anything you would like to add before we wrap up?
Just to thank you all again. It's been very, very interesting. I think we need to have a lot more of these exchanges of views. And I can't stress enough the importance of dialogue and cooperation and working together to consider each country's needs and starting points, which are completely different, and to realize that private and public sector together with civil society, we have to work together on these, because either we all lose or we all win, and we all want to win. So let's work together on these. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carola. Well, I can only add my thanks to all of our guests and experts. I certainly learned a lot. I have always been working on the EU-Latin American relationship, and I have also my whole life been working on business government relationships and spent most of my life in industry representation. So I very much encourage this dialogue that we've had today between industry and regulator, between the EU and Latin America. I'm going to pass back to Chris with thanks again for the organization of this wonderful series of webinars, which I hope to follow, and I hope there will be many more interesting debates of this kind. And of course, also thank you to Robert, as always, for the support of the Paddy Ashdown Forum. Chris.
Thank you, Irina. A wonderful job this afternoon in moderating, and thank you very much indeed. Thank you to all our wonderful speakers today. Really informative. I'm sure there's a lot of thought have been projected out there today, and a lot of thinking, and I hope very much that there will be follow-up questions and queries from our guests who have attended today. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Horacio, for again your deep and insightful thoughts, and Carola. Again, thank you so much indeed for spending your valuable time with us today. And again, wonderful and excellent thoughts, and thoughts we all need to carry forward with us. So I'll just wrap up this webinar. We're going to take a few weeks break now, and then we'll be starting again in September with the next 4 webinars, where the speakers will be from the EU and moderated by our friends from Latin America. So that's going to be extremely exciting too. So everybody, please keep an eye out in social media for all the upcoming announcements, and we really look forward to developing this webinar series, because even out of today we've learned so much, and there'll be some webinars which we can put together from today. So thank you to everyone here, and thank you for attending, and bye for now.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.